Welcome to The World Tonight. We're going to be looking at a very sensitive and complicated topic, the media.
We'll dive into the many intricate reasons on why the media has been letting the public down. In 2016, election coverage was horrendous, and the results will lead to major changes in the following years. But before we look at that, let's see what's going on in the world.
Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein has delivered $3.5 million to the state of Wisconsin to guarantee a recount of the presidential vote there. She is hoping to also have recounts in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Who would have thought Jill Stein, of all people, would come out on top in this election as being a good American citizen?
President-elect Donald Trump said that anyone who burns an American flag should face consequences such as jail or a loss of citizenship. But the Supreme Court has held that flag burning is a form of speech protected by the First Amendment, and the Constitution forbids the removal of citizenship for a natural-born American. Among the consequences, he means you have to watch every season of The Apprentice and tell him how good his hair looks.
On Sunday, Trump alleged that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote because of millions of illegal votes. He said there was serious voter fraud in Virginia, New Hampshire, and California. Mr. Trump has offered no evidence for this statement. That's because there isn't any. Donald, if we're just going to make up statistics to support your claims to make them true, then you might as well make up something interesting. Can you prove that aliens are real or something? Or if I ignore my work long enough, will it magically get done? You won, man. There's no need for you to lash out on Twitter about the system being rigged.
President Francois Hollande of France announced Thursday night that he would not compete in next year's election. This unprecedented move comes after months of unsettled politics and record low approval ratings. His ratings even got as low as 4%. 4%! Don't worry, Mr. Hollande. The French hate everything, even things they like. Croissants are at an all-time high approval rating of 12%.
Man, those French guys need to have a cig and chill out. Now we are going over to political analysts Majestic Storm and Jacob Grenneman to discuss where the media went wrong.
The year 2016, or better known, the horrendous nightmare that you just can't wake up from, has been eye-opening for many reasons. One event that will unfortunately go down in history, and we will have to find a way to explain to our children one day, is the 2016 election.
We will have to tell them how the entire world thought the cold lizard woman was supposed to win by a landslide over Smaug's gremlin cousin. But the real question we have to ask ourselves is, how did we get this so wrong?
There are countless speculations, and surely there will be scholarly journals written about it that we will begrudgingly read for political science classes. The biggest reason that people have come to is that the media looks down on the public, and nobody can trust anyone on either side of the aisle.
Ironically enough, Glenn Beck said it best, and yes, we are serious. On election night, he said on NBC, "We don't listen to each other and we don't trust each other because they view us, the media, as speaking down to them, pontificating, telling them and not listening to them." Beck admitted to contributing to this issue himself. He even told The New Yorker that he empathizes with the Black Lives Matter movement and said he was too hard on President Barack Obama.
Oh God, can pigs fly now? That can't be real.
It is, and he's right. Most news companies and Democratic politicians are based in large metropolitan cities, and they believe that if they shamed the deplorable conservatives enough, then they would come to their senses. The media made it seem as if saying you were voting for Trump was a dirty word. People were outwardly shamed and shot dirty looks if they donned any of the campaign signs.
The media loved to make fun of Trump and his supporters. Wonder why he got so popular so fast back in the primaries? It's because of you, and everyone else would watch every insane thing he'd say on the news. And he got all of that media time for free. The other candidates couldn't stand a chance next to that.
If we don't even consider the other side's opinion or view of the government, then we will continue to drive a stake between the two parties. Even within the Republican and Democratic parties, there are factions that are starting to be formed between the extremists and the more moderates.
With the weakening of the parties, there's no stopping another ridiculous election like this year's from happening again or even becoming worse. Major groups of people in the country are feeling disenfranchised and angry. As privileged as they may be, we can't write off white men and women's opinions, just like we can't write off the opinions of people of color. We are all Americans and deserve respect in our freedom of speech. Back to you at the desk.
Thank you, Majestic. You all remember the presidential debates, right?
You mean the cat fight heard around the world?
Yeah, those ones. We're joined tonight by Rachel Wood to talk about why we can't debate like civil humans anymore.
A major part of politics in any meal with an elderly person is debating. During the hellstorm of an election this year, Americans witnessed the most embarrassing set of debates in our history. What made them so bad? Well, Donald Trump talked over Hillary Clinton consistently in all three debates. He interrupted her over 30 times in the first debate alone. But I'm sure all of us have been interrupted by some liberal vegan with dreads who just has to say that their opinion is more important.
Hey, I was only vegan for a week, and apparently you can't get dreads from just not showering for a month.
Anyway, the reason this election was so detrimental to our political system was because nobody listened to each other. As we mentioned before, major groups have felt like their voices weren't being respected. If we don't change how politicians behave, then in 2020 the debates will just consist of the candidates throwing their shoes at each other. As fun as it would be to see Elizabeth Warren take an Italian dress shoe to the face from Paul Ryan, we can't let our country dissolve into madness. The presidential debates are supposed to show what the candidates really stand for and how they act under pressure. Debates used to make or break politicians, and now it seems as if they can get away with anything. We have to stop villainizing the other side of the aisle. Republicans aren't dumb rednecks, and liberals aren't dirty hippies. Each side has valid opinions as well as ridiculous ones. If we don't at least listen to what the other side has to say and consider their viewpoint, then nothing will get done in our government.
Thanks, Rachel. Many of the media's collective blunders are hard to quantify or accurately measure, but one isn't, and that's the amount of coverage given to each candidate throughout the entire campaign season. Data compiled by the Internet Archive TV News Archive shows that Donald Trump received a painstaking amount of coverage from television news shows. And when I say painstaking, I'm not trying to editorialize. Donald Trump received more coverage than Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, John Kasich, and Ben Carson combined. Or as Trump calls them, crooked, commie, loser, waterboy, liar, boring, and my only black friend.
Why does this sound like the Seven Dwarves?
See, that's exactly it. They are the seven dwarves that lost the election. Now, following the Snow White analogy, the media is actually the Wicked Queen.
Wait, how is the media the Wicked Queen?
Well, the media was the one preparing the evil apple and serving it to the public in form of covering Trump's routinely outrageous statements. But the public doesn't need love's first kiss to break the spell because Trump has already been elected. The public needs a time machine to skip ahead to 2020.
If we break down coverage and just look at one party, we can still find that coverage was nowhere close to being equal amongst candidates. Hillary Clinton received over 75% of coverage given to Democratic candidates, tripling the amount of coverage that her opponent Bernie Sanders received. Bernie Sanders got burned, Lincoln Chafee got chaffed, and well, Martin O'Malley and Jim Webb were just too average and white. And part of the problem with election coverage is sensationalism and the effect Donald Trump had on the media. With more on that, Hafiq Hisham.
Many news outlets have clear biases. For instance, Fox News is conservative, MSNBC is liberal, so on and so forth. But one bias that many news outlets share is the bias towards sensationalism, and Donald Trump exploited that. The jury is still out on whether he meant half the things he said on the campaign trail, but the results are in, and he won. And he won because the media ate up everything he had to say. Regardless of bias, every news station across the country aired clips of Trump whenever he opened his mouth. Since 2015, both CNN and MSNBC have mentioned Trump roughly 348,000 times in their coverage. That's over 500 times a day.
But Hafiq, what are news stations supposed to do when Trump says something controversial? Just not cover it?
Well, Eli, that's part of the problem. The media is stuck in a very dangerous catch-22. If they cover everything Trump says, then he'll continue to dominate the news cycle. But if they don't cover him, then who's going to hold him accountable for when he says something outrageous? Trump manipulated the system in place and used the media for his own benefit. And no one can blame him for doing that.
Didn't Trump also criticize the very media system that helped put him into the White House? No candidate in this election seemed to be more critical of the media than Donald Trump himself.
That's exactly right. Trump was very critical of the media and wasn't afraid to show it. He even had the media in cage-like environments at some of his rallies during the campaign. And that's the funny thing. Trump could bash the media as much as he wanted and still receive coverage. And regardless of how the coverage was aimed, he benefited.
What do you mean exactly? Obviously, we saw a lot of negative coverage of Trump in the media. So are you saying that any coverage is good coverage?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Trump helped to push a narrative in which the mainstream media is crooked and out to get him. So when news shows covered Trump in a negative light, their coverage fell into his narrative, and he was able to bash the very system that perpetually kept him in the limelight. That same sentiment passed on to a lot of his supporters. So when they saw negative coverage on Trump on the news, they saw it as the media unfairly attacking the candidate. In the negative coverage, the media actually hurt itself. And it looks like the media will be hurting itself for the foreseeable future. Chris, Eli, back to you.
Thanks, Afiq. Another defining aspect of this election was the feeling of disenfranchisement. Typically, when we talk about disenfranchisement, we refer to minorities and fringe groups. This often includes African Americans, Latinos, and the LGBTQ community. But in this election, they weren't the only ones who felt disenfranchised.
That's right. In a somewhat ironic but very real twist, a large group of the white population in the U.S. felt disenfranchised, particularly those who lived in rural and more poverty-stricken areas. Donald Trump was able to speak to these voters and garner their votes while others couldn't. Possibly the biggest thing he did to win their votes was to just listen to what they had to say, something the media hasn't done. For more on this, we go back to correspondent Jacob Granneman in Majestic Storm.
Thanks, Eli. Many people in the media are still trying to unravel the election results and understand the outcome. And for a lot of the media, this process is difficult simply because of the perspective the media has.
Top journalists for big news outlets are often referred to as the media elite. And whether they identify this way or not, it has an impact on how people perceive them. Because for a lot of people, this election came down to identity, and the media played a big part in that.
What exactly do you mean? Do people not trust the media because they see them as elitists?
Well, that's certainly a part of it. For people who live in rural America, it's very hard to watch and consume news from big-name journalists who shoot down the candidates they support and the ideology that they identify with. Author Kathy Kramer recently came out with a book titled The Politics of Resentment, which delves into personal identity and its impacts upon elections, focusing on the community in rural Wisconsin.
What kind of issues does Kramer talk about in her book?
Well, there are three main issues, all relating to identity, that Kramer writes about. The first is that people felt they weren't getting their fair share of decision-making power, and that people living in urban areas had all the control. Urban areas are also where all news stations are located and tend to focus on. Second, people complained they weren't getting their fair share of public resources, and that issues in urban areas are addressed before those in rural areas.
So a lot of the political divide rests in the distinction between rural and urban America. And you're saying the media helps feed into this?
That's correct. The media often tends to self-identify with urban America, and rural Americans certainly identify the media that way too. And this ties into the third topic Kramer addresses. People in rural America feel they aren't respected and that politicians and the media elite don't understand the problems they face in everyday life. So particularly in this election, the media helped to widen the ideological divide and in a sense, disenfranchise the thoughts and feelings of a large proportion of the country. Back to you at the desk.
The media has been a staple of our information diet for as long as it's existed. Many of us awake to breaking news and individuals from across the globe spouting ideas and opinions. But how do those ideas and opinions shape how we perceive and understand our world? As the adage goes, a man hears what he wants and bitches and moans about the rest. Oddly enough, the same seems to be true of many broadcast pundits, reporters, and publication owners.
Bias in the news has long been a point of contention, not only because it can seem contradictory, but also because many of us simply want the facts. Some people see opinions as an annoying barrier.
To quote Edward R. Murrow, whose ghost haunts this very studio, to be persuasive, we must be believable. To be believable, we must be credible. And to be credible, we must be truthful. This is precisely the dilemma that's created so much buzz over bias in the media, the dilemma of credibility. Fact-checking has presumably exited the scene in many people's opinions. Large amounts of people have even begun to steer clear of the expressly biased news. According to the Pew Research Center in 2012, 68% of Americans said they would rather get their political news from a source that has no political leaning either way.
So should Bill O'Reilly, Rachel Maddow, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, and so many more start looking for alternative uses for their bullhorn broadcasts? Maybe not just yet.
Fox News, previously known as Roger Ailes' House of Misconduct, leads the pack in viewership for cable news stations. According to Pew Research and Nielsen Media Research, in 2014, Fox was pulling in nearly 2 million viewers every night. As for MSNBC, all of their political whining wins them on average over 500,000 viewers every primetime slot.
Clearly, some people like what they see, and honestly, who can blame them? It is normal to seek out others who agree with us. It is how we create movements, share ideas, and form community. It only turns dangerous when we seek out solely those that agree with us. These points can be justification of attacks against biased news coverage. On one hand, it helps people see their own beliefs on the mass spectrum, but on the other hand, it can lead to narrow-minded news producers and consumers.
Some are looking into ways to achieve the happy medium. Whatever your views of CNN are, it's clear they've at least made attempts to achieve a more centrist-type stance in their coverage, hosting panels of voices from both sides of the aisle and having long-respected journalists anchor shows are among some of their strategies.
Ultimately, whether bias from our talking heads works perfectly or not, they are here to stay. According to a study done by the Pew Research Center in 2011, over half of all Americans said they recognize bias in the mainstream broadcast media. According to the same study, 62% of Republicans and 47% of Democrats said they believed there to be bias in the media.
So where does that leave us? Can we not believe anyone for fear of being indoctrinated? Should we all trade our laptops for typewriters, move to the mountains, and become gopher-eating hermits?
Simply put, no. If anything, we should begin to speak up about the issues we see with biased news coverage. Becoming well-educated consumers of news does not take a college degree.
Then why am I here?
It simply takes recognizing the bias that exists and choosing to appreciate and understand every side.
To quote the late David Carr of the New York Times, we're entering a golden age of journalism. This is the hope we, as producers of news, hold on to. It's an idea that may or may not come true, but will always exist. And on behalf of everyone on the show, thank you for watching.
This is The World Tonight.